Video games, as a medium, still have some growing up to do. It was quaint in its infancy, to the point that people barely paid any attention to it. Then it lashed out in its teenage years, drawing attention to itself. As is so often the case in our teenage years, this attention was largely negative. As it stands now, video games have become very mature. They are capable of tackling serious topics of a political, sociological, and psychological nature. It isn't recognised as such by some. It is all too easy to hear the term video games and immediately visualise this. However, most critics have acknowledged that video games, at the very least, are becoming more and more relevant as an art form. Unfortunately, like cinema, there is one area that it is consistently letting itself down. The representation of women in the media is a constant stigma. Often reduced to mindless sex objects with no agency, this has been simultaneously diluted and emphasised in video games since their origin in order to fit the genre they're in. There has been a handful of positive, or at least well-meaning, representations of women in games, particularly in recent years. This is a positive change and shows that the industry is at least in conversation on the issue. Game developers are self-aware, sometimes parodying female representation in their games. It's important to recognise this as an acknowledgement of the issue rather than a solution. The way women look, act, and speak in games is still a problem, and much of this is down to it being a male-dominated industry. To analyse every single example through this lens would be far too big a task, so instead, let's look at one of gaming's best-known auteurs and see what it is he's trying to say. Kojima is a Japanese game director, best known for his involvement in the Metal Gear series. Previously, he also worked on games such as Snatcher and Policenauts. His next title is the highly anticipated Death Stranding, the first trailer of which debuted at E3 2016. Kojima's vision, his sometimes controversial marketing strategies, and sense of humour sets him apart from many other game developers. The final products his games become are most often viewed as a reflection of him, the director, rather than a studio-based effort. He is well known for his insistence on details that, mechanically, add very little to the experience. As a result, it is fair to assume that the way women are represented in his games is very much overseen by Kojima himself. Kojima, like many game directors, is very self-aware. He loves playing any number of tricks on players, which he is able to do based on our collective knowledge of the medium. He has built entire boss fights that interweave the hardware the game is being played on, creating advantages and disadvantages. He created a much anticipated sequel that deliberately poked fun at player nostalgia and expectation. His entire Metal Gear series is a stark commentary on how disconnected we are from the actual horror of war. An analysis of that would require another video all by itself. With all this in mind, it seems fair to assume that Kojima is aware of the overarching issue when it comes to representing women in video games. He has tackled it himself on occasion. The example many people quote is his portrayal of the boss, one of the central characters of Metal Gear Solid 3, Snake Eater. As a mother-mentor figure to Snake, she is neither overtly sexualized nor complacent within the action. Her design puts emphasis on strength and authority, and she is shown consistently besting Snake in battle. It is a considerable achievement that the game is emotionally centered on her, but this is not a romantic relationship. This is not the only time that this happens. In the first Metal Gear Solid, Naomi Hunter's motivations are also fueled by emotion, but it is familial rather than romantic. There are some issues around her representation, but she is nonetheless a key player in the story whose actions are felt by many. Unfortunately, these examples are the exceptions in Kojima's work. Kojima is a well-known lover of movies, speaking passionately about some of his favourite releases on social media. And the franchise that he seems to be taking many of his cues from when representing women is James Bond.
Link, say goodbye to Felix. Man talk.
In both cases, there may be some that have agency and capability, but ultimately, they are all beautiful women that need to be dominated in one way or another. Bond girls have historically been some of the most problematic representations of women in cinema, and this tradition looks to be continuing with video games here. In its simplest terms, the work of Hideo Kojima is blatantly voyeuristic. There are other things going on with many of his subjects, and there are elements of parody and subversion throughout. However, it doesn't change the fact that you spend so much of your time ogling women. They are designed to be on the receiving end of the male gaze, either through their appearance or actions. If they're not showing off an impressive amount of thigh, they are sporting a cartoonishly emphasized cleavage. And if Kojima places his women in a situation where they can't be ogled visually, such as the codec, you can be damn sure there will at least be some flirting, innuendos, or outright propositioning. Take Metal Gear Solid 2 for example. Earlier in the game, we are introduced to two characters in fairly quick succession, Vamp and Fortune, male and female. Both characters are powerful and capable foes, but the way we are introduced to them speaks volumes. Let's take them out of context. Ignore their role in the story and their genders. Just look at the way they are portrayed and the way the scenes play out. One is slow, melodramatic, and almost sensual in terms of lighting and music. The other is fast-paced, tense, and tinged with horror elements. Fortune is constantly on the receiving end of the male gaze, remaining stationary so that the camera can easily caress her. Vamp, on the other hand, has no place under the male gaze. As a result, we are given barely any time at all to appreciate his overall appearance, which is bizarre considering his potential as a sexualized figure. The only real exception in Vamp's scene is this. The knife is clearly a phallic item, but the scene doesn't allow us to appreciate the way we appreciate Fortune. It is very much perceived as a threat to masculinity. The representation of homosexuality is something we can revisit in another video, but that is not what we were talking about here. Kojima's voyeurism isn't exclusive to cutscenes. It works its way into Easter eggs, gameplay, the humour, and even entire side missions. It's worth noting as well that this is often delivered to the player in the guise of a reward, never a punishment. When you learn that Meryl in Metal Gear Solid 1 is disguised as a soldier, you need to figure out how to distinguish her from the other guards. Naturally, the only way Snake can tell her apart is the way she shakes her booty. It's one thing to present women as objects on screen, but we literally can't progress the game until we actively engage in the activity here. We can try and guess at random, but if we guess wrong, we are punished. Staring at Meryl's butt is very much presented to us as the right way to progress. Worse still, if we follow her fast enough, we unlock an Easter egg. By definition, an Easter egg is considered a bonus, a plus, for achieving a very specific feat. It might be pointless, but at the very least, it presents a novelty value. We could view Meryl parading around in her panties as a novelty, but given the context of the game itself, Kojima's work, and the immediately preceding scene, it seems obvious that this is just titillation. In Metal Gear Solid 3 and 4, we are given a little more freedom. During cutscenes, we are given the option to see things from Snake's point of view. Refusing to do this feels stilted, as though we are resisting something the game developer wants us to engage in. Therefore, we naturally press the button to do so once we're prompted. It feels natural. From a gameplay perspective, it feels right. For the most part, this is fine. It gives us a little more context into a situation. But sometimes, It should be noted that the button prompt does not appear on all of these occasions. This could easily be read as Kojima making it easier for players not to engage with his voyeurism. That argument is easily made void when you consider one thing, however. It's still in the game. Putting this sequence together takes work, and the mere act of putting it into the game is encouraging to players. All of this is perverse enough in its own right, but it gets even more disturbing when you bring the camera minigames into the mix. The Beauty and the Beast unit from Metal Gear Solid 4 is a prime example of this. Once each boss is defeated, you are given the option to take pictures of them in provocative poses and making very, very suggestive groaning noises. It's hard to say what's more unsettling, how completely at odds and unrelated this sequence is, or the need to posit these women as supremely damaged human beings before they are introduced as sex toys. While the camera mechanic was introduced in Metal Gear Solid 1, it evolves as a problem gradually. It is only really identifiable as a problem in the expansion, Metal Gear Solid Special Missions. Early on, we find a photography mode where we can take pictures of Naomi Hunter or Mei Ling in a virtual space. The more missions you complete, the closer to the model you can get. The evidence for Kojima's work as voyeuristic fantasy is at its most blatant here than in any other aspect of his work. In almost any other instance, voyeurism is wrapped in the guise of humorous Easter egg, or at least coupled with some sort of novelty factor to make it enticing. With this mode, however, there is no novelty other than the lack of engagement you have with your model. Snapping her from a certain angle doesn't cause a reaction. You aren't scored based on your pictures. Nothing happens in this mode, except you, the player, can take unlimited pictures of a girl making vaguely suggestive poses. It offers zero rewards other than the act of voyeurism itself. It's very easy to take single examples and twist them to suit your argument. Are we simply hyper-aware of these occurrences now? Sexual politics have become a particularly hot topic in recent years, so perhaps we are just searching relentlessly for any minor misconduct in any form. What's next? Fat-shaming Kirby? This is the easy road to take when it comes to video games, because it's once again so easy to hear the term video games and think of this. Video games are enjoyed across a broad range of audiences, however, and that gives creative directors a responsibility. Many of the issues raised so far are subtle enough that they might not even register, but that makes them even more insidious. And if that still feels like a stretch, if you still feel that Kojima is just a victim of thin-skinned social justice warriors, bear this in mind. There is a mechanic in the game Policenauts that lets you fondle female characters' boobs. Think on that for a second. Gender issues aside, Hideo Kojima is still highly praised within the video game industry. He has done a lot for the medium, progressing it in creative and innovative ways. He's a funny guy, he makes critically acclaimed games, and he does genuinely seem to mean well. Let's take a minute to see his side of the argument.
今まで出てきたようなキャラは作らないということで、今までのシリーズではなかったような新しいキャラクターっていうのを、出すようにしています。そもそもキャラクターデザインだけを出すべきじゃなかったんですけど、ユーザーさんがコスプレしたいっていうんで出したんですけどね。で、キャラクターデザインを先行して出すことはまずありえないです。だからキャラクターデザインだけを見てどうのこうのっていうのを、心配されてもそれはほとんど無意味なことだと思いますけど、キャラクターっていうのは物語の中で登場して初めて生きてくる。そのためにそういう姿形をして服装をしているわけなんで、その世界観の中で見て初めてキャラが立つわけですよね。でそこをまず見せてない状況でキャラでだけを見せたんで、皆さんが心配されてると思いますけど、実際にゲームの中ではなぜああいう格好をしてるかって全部理由があって、でそれが一つ一つ解明されたりするんで、女性のファンが多かったっていうのはちょっとびっくりして結構嬉しいですけど、その辺はあんまり心配してもらわなくてもいいと思います。行く上で感じることっていうのは。
The character of Quiet in Metal Gear Solid 5 is Kojima's most obvious and active attempt to address sexist portrayals of women in video games to date. At first glance, it seems to simply follow the trends of so many other sexist portrayals in modern games. If anything, it is a particularly bad example because so little effort is made to hide her sexualized figure, her sensual behavior, or how little agency she is given, despite the fact that she is so powerful in gameplay. Kojima publicly addressed the issue, placing Quiet in the spotlight for feminist discourse. On the surface, if we take Kojima at his word, Quiet dresses in the highly sexualized way she does because it is relevant to the story. The reason behind this is that she is infected by a parasite that allows her to only breathe through her skin. It also prevents her from talking because it is a vocal parasite that infects its host through the use of language. What Kojima appears to be suggesting is that we will eat our words because we will be so invested in the narrative and that her particular backstory will clarify her overall appearance. This point is made null and void due to the plot of Metal Gear Solid 5 being almost universally maligned. At the very least, critics agree that it is subpar compared with the rest of the series. So, does Kojima actually believe what he says about the narrative? It's hard to say, but it is telling how little emphasis is placed on story here in comparison to previous titles. Metal Gear Solid 4 had over 8 hours of cutscenes, whereas Metal Gear Solid 5 cuts this time in half, with many cutscenes being optional to the player. As Kojima himself put it, Metal Gear Solid 5 has more of an open playground feel rather than a narrative focus. So if that's the case, excusing Quiet for the sake of the story is a particularly difficult pill to swallow. For many, it's simply not an option. So, to potentially justify Quiet's portrayal, we need to dive deeper. We need to see what she symbolizes, and if that is an excuse. So let's acknowledge cold facts about Quiet before deconstructing what she means to us. 1. Quiet does not speak. The reason for this is that if she does, she will infect both herself and everyone in Mother Base. She is never portrayed as frustrated or angry about her situation, but she is not quiet by choice either. 2. You have the option to kill Quiet early on, if you choose to. 3. If you kill Quiet and continue the story without her, it doesn't alter the main events. 4. Quiet is very powerful. This is made clear in the opening cutscene when she attempts to kill Snake and very nearly succeeds. She is clearly a very capable and professional soldier. 5. Quiet is made more powerful again when infected with a parasite. Notably, her additional skills are not a result of her natural ability. She was naturally capable, but she is artificially formidable. 6. Quiet is subjected to a lot of violence. This violence is often sexualized, either by the camera's focus or potential rape. She is also treated with suspicion and held in a cell at Mother Base. 7. Quiet is bested time and again by Snake, the player, despite her obvious power. 8. Snake is implied to have a connection with Quiet. When she is being tortured, he doesn't participate and doesn't hesitate to cut her ropes. Ocelot also underlines this by suggesting she is in love with the legend. They have a number of cutscenes in which they are shown communicating well. No one else in the game interacts with her at this level or treats her with any level of affection. 9. Quiet sacrifices herself to save Snake. When she speaks, she says she wants to express her feelings to Snake. 10. Many cutscenes and Easter eggs involving Quiet are focused on her chest and catching her in sexual poses. These are the indisputable facts about Quiet. So, what can we say about them? First of all, Quiet is a character with a comical lack of agency. Previous female characters in Metal Gear Solid games, despite their portrayals, have generally been relevant to the plot. Some of the plots have even hinged on their actions. Quiet is the most prominent female character in the game and the promotional material, yet her actual role in the plot is non-existent once she has been recruited. Players who choose to kill Quiet need to feasibly be able to continue and enjoy the game. This gives Quiet all the agency of a corpse from this point on. On top of this, while Quiet can speak, she chooses not to in order to prevent the virus infecting her from spreading in Mother Base. Disregarding the batshit insane plot on the basis of it being batshit insane, we are left with the symbolic gesture. Quiet deliberately and willingly sacrifices her own agency for the benefit of a predominantly male group. The second thing we can take from these facts is Quiet's strength and abilities. At the very least, we cannot accuse Kojima of portraying women as helpless damsels in distress. With one or two glaring exceptions, they are generally quite capable and/or intelligent. Quiet takes this to a new level, exhibiting skills at least on par with the boss in Metal Gear Solid 3. She is also particularly vicious in the way she attacks male soldiers in this scene, which is strongly implied to be an attempted rape. At first glance, it appears to be a pointed backlash to derogatory male behaviour. These men are the epitome of sexual deviancy, and Quiet punishes them in the most appropriate way possible. In isolation, this is a positive message. Rapists and potential rapists obviously deserve punishment for their actions. In the context of the entire game, however, things get muddier. Are we meant to re-evaluate our view of Quiet now? She is still highly sexualized, and the game does not seem to be trying to punish the player for watching or enjoying these scenes. Is the suggestion here that women should be allowed to conform to idealized portrayals of male sexuality for their own pleasure, rather than the pleasure of men? It's a nice idea, and one that would have merit if it weren't for the fact that this is an entity created by a man, with men in mind. The same man responsible for this. It is also confused further by the fact that, although Quiet seems practically unstoppable, Snake takes her out on a number of occasions. Other male characters are helpless before her, but you, the player, have the ability to dominate her. This forms a subliminal and uncomfortable only I can have her narrative in the mind of the player, especially considering our next point. The third and final thing that we can take from what we know about Quiet is that the game wants us to connect with her. The fact that she is so powerful naturally encourages the player to recruit her rather than kill her after Snake fights her. She is also treated badly by members of Mother Base and enemy soldiers alike, even after she has helped you in battle. And her backstory indicates tragic events in her past, a Kojima staple for beautiful women. That makes her a sympathetic character in the eyes of the player. Most importantly, however, the camera cannot stop focusing on her assets. You will spend a lot of time admiring the jiggle mechanics in this game. That might seem like a simplistic way of looking at things, but when you consider how much screen time Quiet's breasts get, it is impossible not to take their presence into account. Frankly, they have more of a personality than Quiet herself. Cynicism aside, this ticks most of the boxes for a good in-game sidekick, for a certain demographic at least. Powerful, sympathetic, and sexual. Engaging is unfortunately absent from that list, but hey, you can't have everything. These points all come together to form a character whose portrayal is very difficult to justify. She is given justification for her looks, but it is flimsy to say the least. She is powerful, but not so powerful that she can't be overcome by the player. And she is designed purely to be enjoyed by the player, either through her interactions with other characters or by the way the camera invades her personal space. But if this swings so widely in the opposite direction of progress, is there an argument to be made that Quiet is a parody? This scene is certainly so ridiculous and so maligned by the gaming community that it could very well be tongue-in-cheek. Ironically enough, the reason it is difficult to believe in Quiet as parody is because she isn't excessive enough. Yes, she is a bikini-clad sniper with massive memories and no voice, but in accordance with the game's tone, that translates simply as tragic figure. On paper, she can be construed as parody, but in execution, it just doesn't work. Kojima's melding of the fantastic and the grounded has always lent his games a certain charm and has been utilised for commentary before. It's part of the reason they feel so unique. When we play Metal Gear Solid 1, it begins as a very serious spy thriller. The word terrorist and nuclear weapons are carefully placed to establish its menacing tone. Slowly, we are introduced to cyber ninjas and psychic super soldiers. The tone never changes, however. Even during its wackiest moments, the game doesn't break character and maintains its bleak atmosphere. We can easily enjoy it as a video game, but we are constantly made aware that we're role-playing in a scenario that is based on very real and very tragic events. It feels as though something similar is happening with Quiet in Metal Gear Solid 5, but it's lost in translation. Her appearance and backstory is comical in how regressive it is, but the tone suggests we're supposed to take it seriously. Much like Metal Gear Solid 1, there's a lot of playful absurdity with Quiet, and it is punctuated by moments that make us question what we're seeing and doing. Giving Kojima the benefit of the doubt, he seems to be highlighting the way we enjoy ridiculously sexualized women in gaming, while reminding us of the rampant sexism present both in the media and real life. This approach worked for war in Metal Gear Solid 1, but it doesn't work for sexism in Metal Gear Solid 5. Kojima didn't start a war or a conflict when making a commentary on it in Metal Gear Solid 1, but he has very much created a sexist character in commenting on female representation in Metal Gear Solid 5, and that creates problems. If the commentary inherent in the first game doesn't register with players, we are simply left with a critically acclaimed game about war. It's a shame if players can't appreciate it on that level, but it isn't damaging if they don't. If the commentary in this game doesn't register, and that seems likely, we are left with a very popular and widely played game with deeply troubling things to say about gender. The result is, not only does Kojima come across as perverted in his views, but there is a danger that many players might believe that this sort of portrayal is justified. Kojima has been walking a tightrope in the circus tent of gender politics since his career began. He has stumbled on multiple occasions, but his relative obscurity and talents have been extremely reliable safety nets when this happened. With Quiet being his worst stumble yet, however, eyes are set firmly on Death Stranding to see what happens next. It seems safe to say that he won't make the same mistake twice. Female characters we have seen in Death Stranding all seem to possess relatively sensible outfits, and they all have vocal cords, which is a plus. With the big focus on creepy little fetuses, there may very well be something else he wants to say about gender in that obscure way that he does. It would be gratifying to see the game maker redeem himself with some smart commentary, but it does need to be smart. Not just in what he says, but how he says it.